And before we start, thank you all so much for being here. And before we start, please give a very, very warm welcome to Rem Koolhaas and Irma Boom. It's a dream come true that we can have Rem and Irma here talking about books. It's, of course, the perfect segue from what we've just experienced with Yossi and the many book recommendations. It's also deeply connected, of course, to yesterday when we had Sasha Stiles here, the great poet of the AI age, talking about the importance of books. And it is a very magical collaboration between Rem and Irma for so many years. They've done dozens and dozens of books together. Irma told me today there are at least, besides the many realized books, 50 unrealized dummies of unrealized books. So this is a great, great collaboration. We could almost refer to it as a book machine. And I wanted to kind of begin with the beginning and ask you both to tell us how it began. How did you meet?
Of course, we met through books. What else? And so you see here a very big book on the table. And of course, I always bring the real books because it makes me feel like a dinosaur always. You're talking about AI and digital stuff, and there's a lot of modern things happening here, but we are talking here about analog books. In '96, I worked together with an art historian, Johan Pineapple, on a big book. Very fat book, but at the same time, Rem Koolhaas made SML XL with Bruce Mau. And so it is crazy that in a time where no big books were made, that two Dutch people were working on such a huge project and living in the Netherlands, but not knowing each other. And basically, I think, at least that's my version, that brought us together. They do it.
Okay. And the Dutch are not particularly sympathetic to megalomania, so we were kind of pretty lonely in terms of pursuing such an extremist way of looking at books, and that kind of reconnected us.
And you're actually working as we speak, and I thought maybe we could talk about that first, because it's always exciting to talk about what's happening right now. You're working on a very big new project together. It's basically the latest of printed books that you've collaborated. Rem, it sort of began with you thinking about an autobiography, which is something you're actually not comfortable with. So it's a suggestion of lives. So much more than an autobiography, it's a book about many lives. Could you talk a little bit about this process? Because I think it would be great to hear, because this book is not written, but it's sort of only partially written. So if you give us insight on how the two of you work together on the process, no?
Yeah. So basically, there was some kind of pressure to write a book about my life, but I was totally interested to write a book which included the word I or the word me. So I was looking for a way to avoid that. And then I was also currently extremely upset politically by the way in which European and American intellectuals are kind of rejecting some of the kind of earlier features of mobilization. We are rejecting, of course, Russia, China, and are creating more and more kind of hostility and alienation in terms of connection to other parts of the world. So then I realized that I was part of a generation, the first generation maybe, that was unable to work in every part of the world. And instead of kind of writing about my influence on those countries, I've been thinking about the influence of all these countries on myself, and that enabled me to write a book not about myself, but about my life as a Frenchman, my life as a Russian, my life as a German, my life as a Chinese, my life as all these lives together, which we're trying to compress in a single book. And that single book, hopefully, will also give a kind of sense of the beauty of the world and the intelligence of other parts of the world, and give a picture of how it was in the period that all those parts could work together.
And Irma, what about you in terms of the process? When do you enter? as the graphic designer?
Well, the good thing about collaborating with Rem, because as you know, making a book is a collaborative effort, not only between the author, the bookmaker and printers and binders, but Rem always starts a discussion at the very beginning. So when he has an idea, we already had many meetings, and there are already some models made, and by the office, but also by me. And so I think with the design and Rem's content, we are trying to develop. And what my aim is, I really like books. I also do this study at the Vatican Library, and I see that books, basically, a book is turning the pages and it has a certain sequence. And I think Rem's new book will have a sort of layers, and we are looking how we can make a book which is basically a simple book, but how can we show all these layers, all these different lives and all these different connections? And I think that is at the moment what we are investigating. And if you have a process like that, it will be at least also an analog book. So the idea is to make many, many, many models and trying how we can achieve this layering. That is one part of it.
I think I'm not a very big fan of my profession, architecture, but it has one incredible strength and virtue, which is that by definition every architect collaborates. No architect can do anything alone. And what that does and what that practice does, that you become kind of pretty relaxed in terms of letting other people influence your work. And of course, writing is still a solitary activity, maybe not for long, but still it's solitary. But through my practice in architecture, the idea that there is some partnership from the very beginning that also helps to define what you're actually doing and what you actually need to write is extremely liberating, because you're coming out of a kind of prison, the prison of ego and the prison of other things. And Irma is particularly suited to that because she's not only a form giver or a designer, but also an incredibly critical kind of reader and editor.
Now we have books here, physical books, not only books, the images. And one book, Irma, you brought is, of course, Project Japan, which is a book we collaborated, the three of us collaborated together. And I mean, both Rem and I have been obsessed by this Japanese movement of architecture, metabolism, and 10, 15 years ago, all these protagonists were still alive. They were mostly in their 80s, an incredibly relevant movement for also many young artists and architects working now, also related to ecology, the idea of architecture as an ecosystem. I mean, so many dimensions to metabolism. And what was interesting is actually, Rem, you said in a way that doing a book means also that maybe something one is kind of almost obsessed by can be concluded. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about that. That's maybe, you know, finishing a book means moving on to a next chapter. And then I wanted to kind of hear from Irma about, you know, the kind of magical way of bringing structure into a project. What happened here was basically Rem and I would interview all these amazing metabolist architects in Japan over several years, and would basically give an enormous amount of material with the editor, Kayoko Ota, of course, editing it down, to Irma, and then Irma invented almost like an architecture. So it would be great to hear about these two things, right? The book maybe bringing something to a conclusion, and then from Irma, how to bring in structure.
Well, basically, I was thinking last night what to say or what to think. And I certainly can realize that perhaps a book and completing a book is one of the most beautiful ways of getting rid of an obsession. Because if you do a building, the obsession never ends, because the building is still there to kind of remind you. People are complaining about it, people are kind of living in it, there's kind of problems, issues, it gets on fire. But the beauty of a book is that you can use it as a conclusive and final kind of say about something that you wanted to say. And actually that is quite rare. And I think that's a kind of underestimated kind of part of bookmaking.
And what about the structure, Irma? I mean, it was kind of magical because we were really at the loss. We had all this material and then you made magic.
Well, I don't know, but what was for me very interesting working with Rem and Hans Ulrich, people who produce a lot and keep on producing. And I think that was a critical thing because you always came with new material. And it's also very exciting. But also here, I think it's also meeting a lot and talking about it. But there was so much material, and for me, I'm maybe very Dutch. I want to have clarity. I thought, what do we have? We have interviews, we have historical events, and there was something else. And so 3 parts. And I think for me, to help you guys find out what the book is, I made, a book exists of signatures, but I made from every interview, from every historical part, a separate booklet. So I could always give Rem or Hans, but Rem lives very close, we're almost neighbors, in Amsterdam. So I could always give one piece of the book so that you can concentrate on that one piece. And so the book exists of, almost 40 pieces. And so these 40 pieces we could also structure in a different way. And I think because it were these loose pieces, we could very beautifully give the book a layer of the interviews, and then in between the historical events. So it was a very organic process how to bring the book finally together. And that because of the loose parts, you're very flexible, and you could see if you wanted to add more images. I think there were current photos of Rem Koolhaas. So there were all these different parts which we brought in a certain structure. But it was quite a challenge. It was 1 year, every day, 24/7, working on this book. I didn't almost do any other project, and only Project Japan in 1 year with an assistant.
But there's maybe also kind of something almost reactionary to say, which is that bookmaking is also kind of very physical activity, and this is obviously not a kind of fashionable or welcome statement, but the fact that we could kind of daily interact on a daily basis, make models, is really crucial to understand Irma's production. Because she can think, but she can also make with her hands kind of tiny objects, and that enables us, you see a number of different scales already on this kind of book. You know, every scale, of every possible scale can match any possible kind of content, but there's only kind of one right way to make these 2 conditions meet ideally, and that can only be tested and kind of verified and justified if you have the kind of physical entity in front of you.
Yeah, because there was so many content, and to make it basically physical, you see what you have, and you could see what you wanted to add. And I think that was great about this collaboration.
Now, Rem mentioned that you do big books and you also do tiny books. I see here your magnum opus. It's basically your catalogue raisonné of all the hundreds of books you've been doing. It's a tiny, tiny little red book. Can you tell us about this magical object? Because it's basically, it keeps growing and it keeps evolving. There are many versions of it.
Yeah, so Rem is working on his biography. And basically this is my biography. And it's very clean. It's basically the books I've made. A selection, there's always a different selection. And the book started with a tiny version, because I think I have to become better and better, and over time you become better. And if I have an exhibition, I make always a new catalog. So it's basically a catalog. It's a collection of books I've made, and this book also contains the study I do at the Vatican Library, which for me at this time of my life is crucial, because I'm researching what happened to the book. And the research in the Vatican, I also compare to what I have made and where I stand in history. And I found out that everything basically already has been done. But of course, you find new ways and new inspiration. But this book is now the 3rd one, and this is made last year. And if I become 100, so the book grows every year 3%, the book will be this size. And I thought, I was telling to Rem in the plane this morning, I think I should already produce this book, because becoming 100, I don't know, and I hope so, but then I probably cannot really see it. So I want to, my next book, I really want to have this book made. So it's basically a collection and thoughts about bookmaking. I describe what bookmaking for me is and the relevance of the analog book versus the dynamic of the digital book versus the static of the analog book, which I think is super relevant. Because
one of the most epic books you did together is Elements of Architecture. Yeah, we have it on the screen. It's 2,528 pages. You also commissioned Wolfgang Tillmans, the photographer and artist, to do an essay. And it's striking in content and design, also in scale. And it's also a book which at the same time is many books. Can you talk about that? It was the catalogue, Rem, of the Venice Biennale, but it's also a book in itself. As always, you use the book also as an autonomous vehicle.
Well, I think that for me, one of the most beautiful kind of books is the telephone book. It used to be kind of a familiar thing for everybody, but basically a list of every kind of single kind of phone connection, and the encyclopedia. So we, in Venice, we had to think of a kind of theme, and basically rather than show the kind of evidence of great contemporary architecture, I was interested in trying to describe the history of kind of every single building component through time, but also through all the different cultures. So it's an incredibly wide-ranging entity, and it was a kind of really fantastic challenge to try to get a really absurd amount of information in a book that you could still kind of handle and feel and actually read. And it's a fascinating book because on whatever page you start, there is a kind of totally breathtaking little story that takes you either 1,000 years back or to totally different kind of countries. So it was also, you know, as we made the book also became something that we could never have anticipated kind of when we started. And that's, of course, the most exciting reason to make a book, that you actually discover things you didn't know as you make it. Yeah?
Yeah, and also thinking, imagine if you have this book, which you see here, if all the information was on a website, I think then all the information, it's less present, that it's so much information. And I think the book is a manifest of the amount of information, and it's also a very good navigation, as you can see here with all the colors on the edges. So it is this book with this enormous amount of pages, and that's also what Rem and I said. So Rem, SML, my book here, the SHV book, but we overruled our two books. So I think we're done now with fat books.
Big ones, yeah. So.
Yeah. But this book is it exists as an analog entity, and it's very accessible, and I think that is one of the qualities of this huge book. But it's very easy to go through.
I think it's also a statement for slow books as opposed to, you know, fast books. Because I kind of experienced this when we worked on the metabolism book, because it was a great experience for me, because whenever I thought the book is ready or finished, Rem said, we have to research more. And I think that idea, you know, of it being slow books is also kind of connected to something Enzo Mari always said in terms of design. You know, if we do an object of design, it cannot be fast design or fast fashion, because in order to justify the resources we use, we have, you know, to use a chair, as former Phantasma say, 70, 80, 90 years, right? So that's the opposite of fast design. And I think in a similar way with books, slow books means that they are to last. And for generations and generations, and in that sense, it's a very, responsible use of resources.
But what is interesting, I think, about bookmaking, and also if you see the elements of architecture, it's not that you make a book for now or for the past, but you make a book for the future. And I think that's one of the great qualities of bookmaking, that it's a very static and stable medium. It's one of the most stable mediums ever. If you make a website, maybe in half a year you cannot access it anymore, or the information is gone. A book keeps all this information, so it is really a medium for the future, and that's I think one of the great qualities of an analog book.
Yeah, and also one of the kind of really media that benefits most from globalization. Because every one of these books, you can kind of find it in the most exotic countries, and you really feel that there has been a kind of degree of penetration that in no other medium would be even thinkable.
And it's interesting also.
Maybe the most beautiful experience of that was when I went to Lagos in the late 90s, when it was considered a very dangerous country that was just suffering a series of political coups, and in the throes of a kind of really downward spiral. And I was kind of suddenly in front of a bookstore, and the book SMLXL was in the central in the window. Yeah, and I could not believe that there was any necessity or any kind of interest, even in kind of possible interest in a kind of statement like that in a country at that condition. So that was really genuinely moving and evidence.
And the Lagos book, it's interesting because you did a very big Lagos research, and of course DLD made a big Lagos research. Steffi organized with the team at DLD in Lagos. That's an unrealized book, which you're still working on, no? Talking about books taking time.
Yeah. Well, it's basically unrealized because, of course, 98 was perhaps kind of moment that it could still be plausible that a white man would look at the capital of an African country. But that was of kind of very short duration, and that kind of position was blatantly criticized, but also becoming incredible. So it kind of forced me. I'm still wanting to do the book, but it forces me to a kind of constant kind of adjustment of perspective.
A book which also took a lot of time and actually is, again, an enormous research, but much more than the Venice Biennale catalogue, actually is compressed at the end in a little book, is The Countryside. The Countryside, a report. Again, we have it here, just at this very moment, we have the image. It's the result of an in-depth research, Rem, which looked at the majority of the Earth's surface. It looked at non-occupied kind of surfaces by cities, so basically the opposite of the city, everything which was not a city. Can you talk a little bit about this enormous research, and then how you both, maybe also to hear from Irma, sort of channeled it into a pocketbook?
Well, it is basically a project that at some point I lost my initial enthusiasm for cities, and maybe the reason was that kind of cities develop, they kind of grow, and they are popular or less popular, but there is actually very little which inherently changes about cities. They're kind of same, and kind of sometimes the center is eroded by commercial activity, blah blah blah. But in essence, it's a kind of known quantity, and our current cultures are contributing very little to their evolution. So there was a kind of statistic of the United Nations that was kind of saying that I think in 2008 already half of mankind lived in cities, but that by 2050 that might be kind of 70 or 80%. So that gives me almost a statistical insight that therefore the countryside, or everything which is not city, which is 98% of the surface of the earth, must undergo the most radical changes, and that the countryside is kind of something that is systematically neglected in kind of intellectual kind of thinking or into manifestos or and therefore that became a very interesting challenge to look and create a picture of the current condition of the countryside. So what we did is make zooms on global kind of situations, from permafrost in Russia to conditions in Africa, blah, blah, blah. And then the notion was how to compress that, and Irma should say that, yeah.
Yeah, so this was, in a way, literally our smallest book. And if you think of the countryside, at that time when we were working on it, I was doing this study at the Vatican Library. It's an ongoing studying, actually. And then I was also looking in the library, what is the first, or when is the first color book printed, when is this, when is that? And then I found out that the first printed pocketbook, because I'm interested in the print, I'm interested in manuscript, but basically in the printed book, was printed in 1501, and was a book by Aldus Manutius, and the content is the Laudatio on the countryside by Virgil. And so I thought it was such a coincidence that working on the countryside and then finding this this first pocketbook with basically the same subject. And so I said to Rem, let's make a pocketbook on for this project. And what for me is also interesting, that the oldest book in the Vatican, which is 350 after Christ, is also the same text from Virgil. So I thought it was a sort of destiny that we make a small book for a pocket book for the countryside project.
But the real kind of challenge and rule that we imposed on ourselves was the format should be exactly the same to the millimeter, and exactly the same number of pages, and exactly the same configuration. So it was kind of prototype that we adopted, almost like a hermit crab, and that then also kind of forced us to ingenuity that we otherwise would not have mobilized.
And it's in that sense, you know, a kind of a portable exhibition, no?
Yeah, and also here you see that the form, so the idea of the pocketbook and then the content has to work together. So it's not something we had to use very thin paper to have a lot of text. It's really the form also decided what went into the book.
I've got two last questions. One is, you've not only done many books together, you've also actually done a seminar together and an exhibition at Harvard. The seminar is called The Book in the Age of, and it's an intensive research seminar exactly on the topic of the panel today, really, on the future of the book in the digital age at the moment when so much of architecture happens digitally. You did it together, the two of you, with Philip Denny at the Harvard GSD in the spring 2023 semester, so last year. And it really assembled a kind of a collective history of the book. And I think it's an interesting connection also to what we heard yesterday from Sasha Stiles. No, it has to do with the way how it went from the hand to the press to the machines. Can you tell us a little bit about this research and what were the most interesting, findings, also in collaboration with this young generation of students with whom you work, no?
So Rem invited me indeed for this course. What for me was interesting to work with architects together. So the group of students were not bookmakers, so they came from a different background, and so it was research based. And I think for me also, knowing a bit about bookmaking and the history, I thought it was interesting what kind of images and text and research they came up with, and so maybe things I wouldn't think of, but so basically. What I really think is interesting, if it's hand or machine or whatever, it's always about what you print and what you present. And basically, it didn't change so much. And I think that is an interesting thing for me. It is always about, if you make books, about sharing information, about sharing content. And sometimes it's on a clay tablet, and sometimes it's on a tablet, and also the notion of what a book is. So a book is what we see here on the table. That is what we now know as a book. But a book was also, the tablet. And so I think that was one of the things we, researched, and the basic idea of research and sharing content.
What was interesting for me is that a book is much more demanding than a piece of architecture. Because in a piece of architecture you can always claim or kind of suggest that your artistic insight is kind of suggesting that you make certain decisions and that it's almost on a take it or leave it base. You like it or you don't like it, but that kind of tolerance is absolutely not existing in bookmaking. It's kind of, bookmaking is by definition the making of a kind of very functional object, and whenever the functionality kind of slips, the book simply disappears. And in that sense, it was interesting to see, you know, a profession that is used to a certain degree of grandiosity be kind of forced to adopt a much more disciplined and rigorous domain.
And where architecture can go high, a book is always horizontal. And I think that is also interesting, that with this horizontal, the turning of the pages, you have to make your point. And of course, because of new media, we can make different structures. A book can be differently organized, but it's always horizontal, where architecture is more vertical.
Last question is really about the unrealized books. And you have, I mean, Irma, you told me today that you have about 500 books you did so far, but then there is maybe another 50 or almost 100 of kind of, you know, competition books you and Rem did together. And these are kind of, as opposed to the slow books, these are very fast books, because these are unpublished books, books often about also unrealized projects. And I think it wouldn't be complete, our discussion today about your collaboration, if we wouldn't hear from both of you about these, you know, competition books.
Well, architecture is submitted to an incredibly cruel kind of regime that many of your works have to be launched in the world in the form of a competition, which is kind of very paradoxical, because you get a letter, dear such and such, we believe very much in your amazing talent, but at the same time the chance that we throw away your work is 90%, because we are inviting 9 other kind of candidates. So it forces you to extreme efforts at both articulation, describing at the same time how things technically work, how beautiful they are, how appropriate they are, how contextual they are, how original they are, how well they work, blah, blah, blah. Typically very incompatible kind of areas. And in that sense, kind of working with Irma has been incredibly crucial. And I would say that some of the best buildings that we were able to realize were kind of thanks to the kind of original brochure or book. No, seriously. You know,
Thank you.
Book which actually told the whole story from the beginning.
Yeah, and if you make a competition book, you have to be very clear in the narrative. A book is basically telling a story, and that's to tell a story about a building and about an idea about a building in a certain amount of pages is very challenging. So you have to have good image material, and that's what we worked on, always to tell the story in a very, you always use the word blatant, I remember, and to tell this story very clearly. So if you look in the book, that you understand the building, and I think that is what, that experience we're still using for current books.
What you see on the screen now, by the way, is the current model of the biography book. We call it a tower, and it's clearly absurd. And so we have a huge task to kind of somehow make this kind of manageable and appealing object.
That is a wonderful conclusion. I do have one very last question for you, Irma, because yesterday we spoke with Sasha Stiles, the wonderful poet of the AI age, about the collaborations as a poet she would have also with brands, with companies. And we talked about John Latham and Barbara Stabini, who said that every company and every corporation with the artist placement group should have an artist in residence or an artist on the board. And you have done exemplary work in that direction, Irma. You've worked with a lot of companies, and you've made annual reports into collector items, which today are among the rarest books, long duration objects which everybody will keep. So can you tell us a little bit about that aspect of your work? Because I thought it would be here in the context of DLD, be very important to hear.
Okay, you mean that's also what I brought here today. So the SHV book, which is a very it's a multinational based in the Netherlands, and so that's the book. Maybe you can show it. It is this huge book telling the story about a company. It's a book it's made in, we started this project in 1991, so it's just on the moment internet became democratic. And the SHV company is a company which looks always into the future and doesn't look into the past. So we thought we should make a sort of centenary book for this company, which is a CD-ROM. But then we checked out the whole idea of CD-ROM, but that was in the very beginning. So every week there was a new version. And that made us think to not make a CD-ROM, so something digital, but we made a book which is based on the ideas of the internet. So it has a sort of non-linear structure. You can go through the book in different ways. So this book it became the most book what I've ever made. But it's because of this challenge, internet, so digital, flux, static, and that book has it all. So it has also no page numbers, which I think is really important because you can browse through this book. It only contains questions, and every question is a case study. So it's a book which you can just how do you say that, browse through, and then you see a layer of images. The moment you start turning the pages page by page, then you get another content. And I thought it was interesting, and everybody said, how did you find somebody so crazy to make a book like this? That is not how it happened. It was really the moment we made that book was crucial. It was this pivotal moment from analog to digital, and this book contains that specific part. And another company thing is a book for Chanel. That's a book which is on Chanel 5, so if talking about the company. And that book is completely white. Or maybe you can show it. That book is completely white. And because it's about perfume, and I wear Chanel 5, and if you see it, then you think, well, a perfume you can also not see, but it is very present. So I thought I want to make a book about Chanel 5. It's for Palais de Tokyo in Paris, where you experience that the book is present, but all the content is in embossing. So the book has if you see it, and you can, if you want to have a look at it later, you can. So you can, it's why it's for me the most ultimate book, because this book doesn't exist as a PDF. The PDF would be white. It only exists as the analog book. So it is a book you can experience by having it in your hand. So the most physical book I've made ever.
And it's, of course, all about the tactility. That's why we're going to have the books here. So for those of you who want to have a look at the books physically, that's possible now. I'm so grateful to you, Irma, to you, Rem. Thank you both so much.
I wanted to remind you of our combined unfinished book, Unrealized Project. We are seriously working on a book which is called Small Nasty Countries, where we want to create a kind of portrait of the Netherlands, Belgium, and Switzerland. And we are thinking of incorporating Singapore, and that will be kind of hopefully finished in the next decade.
Thank you so much, Rem. Thank you so much, Irma. Thank you all.